Well, hello, everybody, and thank you all very much for coming to the second expert panel webinar. This one is entitled The Great Return, and it's certainly more than a flick of a switch. Actually heard that on the evening news in Canada coming up in a couple of days. They were going to be interviewing some industry leaders to talk about the Great Return in Canada. So um, a bit ahead of, just a bit ahead of that, if we could. We've got a couple of, uh, David Bianco from Epiroc is a new panelist who is joining us. And Paul Clark from HSE Global is also going to help me moderate this a bit. We have Alistair McCubbin from Outokumpu Stainless. They make stainless steel. He's back with us. And Alex Carnival from ETEX is also with us. We're going to start with you, Alistair, if we could. But for those of you who weren't here the last time, these are leading companies that I've had the privilege to work with, world-class in my opinion, not just in how they deal with engineering and the facility conditions, but also how they deal with people. And so this isn't advice. This is just what these companies are actually doing. And the idea was that, you know, this isn't theory. This is sort of where the rubber meets the road, and you could all sort of take what you'd like, and obviously, you know, leave what you don't. But that was really sort of the intention at the beginning. And we were going to tackle issues that have been around for a long time, like, you know, what kind of leading indicators do you really believe in? How do you balance accountability and just culture? Is leadership, felt leadership really, you know, really the important thing? But right now, obviously, the important thing is COVID and managing COVID. So eventually, maybe we will get to some of those sort of persistent or nagging problems. You know, why have serious injuries and fatalities not come down? But right now, obviously, everybody's main concern is the Great Return. So, like I said, Alistair, if we could start with you, you have operations in Sweden as well as Europe, North America, Mexico. I'm not sure if anywhere around the world elsewhere than that, you could just sort of let us know. But if you could talk a bit about how, just in general, maybe, you know, the 50,000-foot view you're managing the return, and then maybe anything specific about the differences between Sweden and Europe, or the differences between Sweden and the Americas.
Great, thanks, Larry. Good morning, everybody. I think the overall way we've approached the whole thing is that we've treated this as a company issue, same as we would do with our standards. The difficulty that we have, of course, is that every country has its own ways of legislating and setting up rules around about the coronavirus issues. But our aim from the start was to make sure that we maintained our business and we kept people at work, and we've been very lucky in that respect, where we've not had to cut production dramatically in any way at all, other than when governments have told us that it's that we've had to close down. So we've been very lucky in that respect. And the way that we've approached that, and to try and get beyond the barriers of different countries having different ways of doing things, is to focus on the important things that we saw as being the way that we would get through this. And to do that, we always took the medical advice and followed the science, as I think a lot of you probably are as well. And our medical advice from internal medical advice was to stick very much with the straightforward things, and as he classed it, soap water behaviour. It was all about hygiene and distancing from day one. And you know, from our initial part, we came into the whole issue when it hit northern Italy. From that point onwards, that's always been our mantra, has been soap water behaviour, and we've driven it from that point, and we've been pretty lucky, and we've come through in that way. So, you know, when it comes to planning the return, you know, our return for us is about getting our people back to offices and because generally our production workers have been in place. But the main important part of that is to make sure that nobody in any way at all is put under any pressure, stress, or in any way made to feel unsafe by coming back to the workplace. And again, all our rules and all our plans around about that have been based again around about social distancing and ensuring that people have the ability to keep the hygiene rules at the top level as well. And to back all that up, you know, again, I think as many of you have done as well, we've had many different procedures and rules and whatever, like the big issues being around about what happens when you've got jobs where people can't social distance, and making sure we've got very sound procedures and things in place to make sure that the job can be done only if people are safe to do that job as well. So, you know, it really has been the overall driver before, as we've worked our way into the coronavirus issues, and as we work our way out at the other end, is around about that very simple distancing and hygiene part there as well.
Okay.
But just in one more addition to that, we're actually starting, again, I'm sure like a lot of you, we're starting to think about, you know, the return in certain places and it actually happening. We're able to do that now, but the business is cautious, and we've actually got a lot of people, senior managers, saying, no, it's working as it is, let's leave it for a while, there's no need to rush. And I think that's another way I'd look at it. Don't do it unless you need to do it. You know, if it's working at the moment, make sure that you can maintain the levels that you've got, and then slowly work back into the what will be the new normal.
Okay, all right. Oh, well, thank you very much, Alistair. Okay, so Alex, maybe I know, well, I'm pretty sure anyhow, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had some places that were down, but that wasn't necessarily because of outbreaks, just because of local legislation and things like that. So those places are probably coming back on now, as well as you had places that never shut down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's all correct.
Okay, so take it from the top, Alex, and however you want, just sort of tell us what's happening with both kinds of places, because you've got more issues obviously with the places coming back online. You've got the social distancing and being safe at work, plus the whole 24/7 and not
Right.
coming back to work sick part.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just start by saying, you know, what Alistair talked about, I think is a pretty common starting point, right? So so everything he said, I think from the standpoint of trying to do protocols and trying to have, you know, follow the science, I think, you know, I would echo as well. So rather than repeat that, I was trying to think of, you know, 2 or 3 points that I think maybe, you know, I could add on to it. And I think one important thing is that because there's so much unknowns, you know, place to place, or even about the entire science of it, you know, we've taken an approach where we've tried to limit the central guidance to what we really think is the overriding guidance about doing right protocols, following the science, here's the PPE to wear and things like that, and then try to push the decision making and give the local sites as much ability to adapt to either what the local regulations are, or what they see as far as facts on the ground. So I think that's still an important one that we mentioned last time, is having this local land and central, you know, sort of split up that way.
Right.
I think a second point that we found that's very critical is just over communicating in this situation, because again, this is where, you know, this is a common foe or a common virus, but the information may be different, you know, even site to site or definitely country to country. So communicating what our rationale is, why we're asking for these protocols, why we're doing the social distancing, what the protocol is if somebody tests positive, those are all things that I think help to have the dialogue. And we mentioned in the last thing about the question of trust, you know, and where you have it and where you don't have it. And this is the way to try to either maintain or build the trust, is by having that dialogue, letting people open up with their concerns, and understanding that this is not an exact science for any of us at this point. So the communications part is very critical. And then the third point that I think we've seen is there's always a tension, at least what we've seen in our factories, between production and safety typically. You know, and I think we've all seen that in different forms or whatever else. And now I think we have to make sure, and I think Alistair alluded to it, that if people do feel a tension between hygiene and following the protocols in production, that leadership is taking the appropriate stance and demonstrating that we don't want to go too fast, we don't want to do the wrong things, we're not looking to put people in danger. So there's actually an opportunity to show that, and we've tried to emphasize that from a leadership standpoint. So, I mean, those are the three things that I'd say sort of build a little bit off what Alistair said as far as, you know, finding our way through this. And what we talked about before is basically an invisible and a time-lagged enemy here. So you don't get the immediate, you know, knowledge about if you've put yourself in the fire.
Well, oh yeah, and it's the other thing too, you know, just when you start analyzing all the close calls that you've had, there's a lot of them, at least there have been in my case. So I think you could easily get discouraged and throw your hands up and kind of go, what's the use? You know, there could be a bit of that as well too. Paul, just before we move on to David, what in general, like you get to talk to a lot of industry leaders with HSE, especially in Europe and the UK. Is there a lot of trepidation about going back? Are people really worried, or are they, in your opinion, overly excited and not necessarily cautious enough? Or so just if you know your overall feeling sort of from the community out there.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, it's a difficult conundrum. I think, you know, we've never faced anything quite like this before. Certainly from a pandemic standpoint in my lifetime. But it's interesting, actually. I watched a video the other day, which was a gentleman called Johan Giesecke, who's the ECDC chief scientist. And he was talking about how when governments pulled us into lockdown, there was actually no thought about how we get out of lockdown. And I just think that's mad. You know, we're all going to lockdown, but we've got no idea how we're going to get out because we could be in it for years. You know, so we have to take action. And I think, from my perspective, and this, bear in mind, I work with a plethora of health and safety leaders all over the world, and I'm very fortunate to have them on tap for their learnings and their knowledge. But there's that element, I think, that we've really forced the hand of resilient leadership. And building the heart of resilient leadership, there's a good piece from Deloitte actually that I studied, and they spoke for a number of our programs on that topic. But I put some notes. I mean, I think we need to have resilience in how we operate now, if we didn't have before. I think it's forced the hand in terms of our approach. We cannot create procedures necessarily or predict, but we can modulate and train people on how to act. And, you know, don't focus on predictive or prevent, but maybe train on being resilient, to think on their feet, you know, getting our staff, getting our workers to think on their feet. The top two things for me at this time is resilience and capacity. And you know, if we look at the bushfires, for example, and now this is really unfortunate, but there is a good chance that that can happen again, right? So how do we respond? How do we respond now? And the past was about procedures, but I think now it's about how we do our jobs better. And just on the working from home thing, I'd be interested to know from Alex's point of view, because you mentioned that you've got people that are still in work and you're bringing people back to the offices. There's a lot of noise around how effective, and a paradigm shift in how working from home has been extremely effective. So I mean, a question back to maybe the panelists, if I may, Larry, on how do you feel the change of the new normal will affect working from home, and do you think it's going to be effective for your businesses?
Well, we should definitely get to that, Paul, although you know, I've been ineffective working from home for years, so I've actually felt no pressure at all with the whole new protocol or the new procedures for everybody else. Yeah. David, tell me though a bit about you've got operations in America. I think we're all kind of curious as to how you see that group, that culture responding. You've also got operations all over South America, pretty much everywhere. Plus, all the service operations are everywhere there's mining, really. So,
right.
Yeah, if you could maybe just give us as much as you can about where you're at from the global perspective there, because you've got all kinds of issues with factories and service people and so on.
Yeah, I'm coordinator for the U.S. portion for our company, but I also have divisions and admin responsibility for all of South America. And so I get a lot of that. And I'm part of our EpiRock group, which is out of Stockholm, Sweden, and I interact with them on a regular basis. So I'm kind of seeing it from all sides. You know, the conversation I think about, and I hear Alex and I hear Paul and Alistair, and I think about I always have this saying, the great thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. And the fact of the matter is, this thing is probably the most variant situation I've ever seen in my 40-year career in manufacturing, by opinion, by fact, by approach. It's very personalized, very human. And you talk about human factors, this is about as close as you could ever get to human factors, because it's very raw. Some people are very scared to the word paranoid. Some people are like, I'm going to die of something, so I could get in a car and get killed tomorrow. So we have this very wide range of perspectives. Ironically, being headquartered out of Sweden, and you know this, Larry, you and I were together in January in Europe. We were in Sweden together. We flew through Amsterdam. We ended up in Berlin for some meetings. And, you know, I noticed people on the plane with masks, and this coronavirus thing was being talked about. And so, ironically, when I got back, I mentioned it to my management, and that's probably my mistake. I got stuck in this thing for responsibilities because of saying it. But then Sweden, our mothership, was sending out information, and here's what we're going to do, and all those kind of things. And it seemed very prudent, but very kind of broad, I guess I would say, and letting the local companies manage it as they needed to. In the US, our business was deemed essential manufacturing, so we never shut down. The mines in South America, some have shut down, some have not shut down. So it is a very wide swath of activities, but regardless of where it is, the common thing that I see, and the thing that is most important, and another one of my sayings is you can never over communicate. So back to what Alex said, people need not to know what's going on. People need to understand what's in it for me, and how is it going to affect me. And it's very important to give them some balance, some perspective for the part of their life they spend, 40, 60, 80 hours in whatever a week away from their family. Now they're stuck at home with their family. So you talk about taking SafeStart home and complacency and all those pieces. It's a very dynamic situation and needs to be dealt with at a very personal level, in spite of the fact that it's such a broad thing. As a company, I think we are really big on don't rush making decisions, don't put people in harm's way or in the line of fire, I guess, as you would say, of course, and give them an opportunity to state where they're at and to give them some methods by which that they can learn. This has been a really great opportunity for learning differently. And I think our company is learning, in answer to Paul's question, learning that we can work from home more. In the US, that wasn't as much a norm as it was in Europe, for example, and definitely wasn't a norm in South America. Different cultures, different realities. And so it has brought about that and extended learning capabilities, Zoom, people seeing themselves face to face that never saw themselves, but they're virtually face to face. So out of this negative thing have come a lot of positive opportunities to learn how to work in a new way. So it's a very interesting dynamic, to say the least.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, I'm more concerned, I guess, about North American culture and the complacency drift being faster. Maybe that's just because there's a lot of young people like around, all my kids are at home here, right? So it's 24, 22, 20, and 18. So I don't know how responsible you were at that age. There aren't a lot of statues in my memory, as I recall. Alistair, if I could come back to you and just comment on this as generally as you feel comfortably, or as specifically as you might. But if there's an outbreak at one of your facilities, how are you handling it? Because I'm sure everybody kind of wants to know whether what they're planning on doing is what you're planning on doing or not. Nobody's saying what you're doing is right or wrong. Just if you kind of tell us how you go about dealing with it.
Sure. I think well, first of all, how would we plan to do it? Well, we're lucky in a way. I suppose lucky is not the right word, but we had a small outbreak in one of our factories pretty early on. Very unexpected, because we thought we'd nailed the place down, but it was one of these difficult ones because it was brought in from outside. But what it allowed us to do was to very quickly work on a protocol for how to react to that kind of thing. And I think early on our original plans were, we've got to make sure that we don't overreact and we don't panic, because we don't want to scare everybody out of the whole thing. Because I think we all know an awful lot more now than we did about the whole thing. But 4 or 5 weeks ago, people were still a little bit in the black, not understanding what was going on, what it could do. But I think to David's point, they did actually work out at that point. It was very personal, and it was to them. And I think that's the part that people picked up quickly. So we worked on that and as we did before. And I think the thing is, again, in most jurisdictions, I'm not saying all, but in most jurisdictions, the positive cases are picked up very quickly by the local authorities, and they tell you what to do. That made it quite straightforward. And I think that the one thing, the biggest learning for us was just the tracking and tracing part, working out who'd been in contact, when, where, and what do we do about them. And we just got those people out and away from site. So it was very straightforward in that case. And then obviously there was where has the person been working, what do we need to do about cleaning down, etc. And the disinfectant part there was a bit out of, maybe, do we have to clean it down? Is it going to make any difference? But I think visually it made an awful lot of difference to people around about to be seen that we were actually doing something about that part. So there was the getting people away that were clearly either were positive cases or people who'd been in contact directly as a first degree contacts. And then clearly, but the big part after that, and the big part that we learned from then and we've taken forward is the communication. It's and the part of it being as open as you possibly can, but you do not, you don't want to panic people. So we built a protocol around about, locally communicating both within the company. So who tells who within the company, so it doesn't just come out to the world of within the business, to the senior manager, and then externally to stakeholders, and particularly in some of the places we operate, it's managing your local media as well, because they're looking for a story and they want to find a story, and it's about managing that story as well. Because again, I'm sure in your cases, we can be, where we are, we can be the biggest employer in town, so it's a big deal in that respect as well. So you got to manage that part as well. And then it's about talking to the people who are close to those workers and saying, well, that guy's quarantined because of that, and you don't have to because of this, so that they understand why. And then obviously talk with your, next line then is to talk with the workers' representatives and people like that, and keep them totally involved. So I think, as we said in the previous call as well, the big part of this, once you've dealt with the people, is managing the communication, being transparent about it, telling people why and whatever. And that case. And what we learned from that was that, as we had this going forward, we had our plans in place and we followed those and they worked. But what we learned, of course, is that as people understand more, be ready, because then there's more questions coming back. There's more what ifs, and there's more, if that happened, what would be next? And so we have to be ready for that part. So whereas originally it's a very one-way communication out to the workforce, as it grew a little bit, it started to come back at us. What we're doing about this? Are we ready for that? I've heard this on the TV last night. They said that, and get ready. But you've got to have those open discussions and communications with your workforce, because otherwise you will build that level of, well, I think the word we used was trust there. You've got to keep the trust level up. You've got to be transparent. You've got to communicate with them. And it worked for us, and it's helped us going forward from there. But it's a good learning. And it's not just a good learning from your management perspective, it's a very good learning from your employee perspective, because and a lot of the things you've been telling them beforehand, they actually see the truth and understanding in the fact that, you know, we're doing this for us all. We're not just doing this, you know, because we think it's the right thing to do. And it worked very well for us. So we got through a minor part there, and that's how it worked. But communication and transparency really are the big parts there.
Okay, well, Alistair, thank you for that. Alex, if I could, I don't know if you could just add anything to what Alistair said, if you guys have had an outbreak. And again, I don't know how, you know, how specific you can be or not, but also if you could just sort of merge that answer a bit with Paul's question from before about the resilient leadership, because they obviously go hand in hand, right? I mean, if you've got a crisis at a site, how do you deal with that? That's, if there was ever a case for resilient leadership and stepping up, that would be the time. So have you, well, sorry, I don't want to ask you if you've had any, because then you've got to start going, I can't confirm nor deny or anything like that per se, but just as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I think the point about resilient leadership and leading through ambiguity is a huge question, and I think it's really at the base of what we're talking about here, because even when you talk about having an outbreak at a site, what's an outbreak? You know, is one person testing positive an outbreak? Is a cluster of people an outbreak? You know, so we're all learning and we're all trying to figure that out as we go. I think, you know, the fact that everybody has put in these safeguards and these mitigation actions and distancing and sanitizing and PPE and protocol, you know, that's not meant to eliminate. You know, if we don't want to have any cases at work, we'll shut everything down. It's the classic safety argument, right? So we're all trying to figure out the best way to find the balance about mitigating this and reducing the risk. So if there is a positive case, right, and we've had people, a very small number that have had a positive confirmation throughout our system, which is more than, you know, 13,000 people. So you figure just by the odds, you know, there is, you know, obviously, as Alistair said, there's this direct points about isolating and doing the tracing and trying to make sure the people that were in close contact were, but then it's a matter of trying to fall back onto these mitigation actions and saying that if we are keeping people separate, if we are sanitizing, if we are having people wear masks, that the risk can be at least sufficiently minimized. And the point that comes back to leadership is that we don't know that for sure. None of us, because this is so new, can say with 100% confidence, we're learning and we're going and we're taking data and we're giving feedback. Now, the point that's really interesting about the resilient leadership that you mentioned is that any crisis, truthfully, doesn't necessarily create new challenges. It accelerates challenges that are already there. And we've actually been spending a lot of time over the last couple of years talking about, you know, leading in ambiguous times, that the world is becoming more and more ambiguous, whether it's from a business standpoint or whether it's from a supply chain standpoint or how competition goes or how people act or how governments act or socio-political. So there's, you know, a huge handful of factors that create this ambiguity, that create a need for resiliency. And what I think COVID is doing is it's focusing all that and not giving people an option to not work on it anymore. You're faced with it and you have to deal with it. And some leaders are going to thrive and some leaders are going to be overwhelmed by it. And it is this massively accelerating classroom to figure out, you know, how to manage in these days. And the scariest part from a leadership standpoint is you don't know if you're doing exactly the right thing. You're trying to do the best thing you can. You're trying to get the feedback loops and then go from there. So that is one of the positives about creating, I think what'll come out of this is a new leadership generation where taking on unknown challenges, taking on ambiguities, being ready for the next crisis, whatever it is, because there will be the next one, you know, we'll see.
Well, certainly the era of we'll appoint a committee and the committee will make some recommendations and then I, as the leader, will decide whether I will or won't accept the recommendations. And if I don't like that committee, I'll get a new committee and listen to there's no time for that. So, you know, I think there will be a lot more of, you know, on your feet and moving quickly and not being able to sit back and, to be more definitive as a leader. I think you won't be able to, just sort of take it all in and wait for a calculated answer. I think you'll have to, step up.
Yeah, but I think the point, but one of the, sorry, Larry, but I think one of the points is that that's already been a trend, right? Most places don't have the command and control, the hierarchical leadership or structure that was there 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so it's accelerating what I think was already a trend about needing to be agile, needing to make decisions on the local areas and all that. So I think the good companies and the good leaders will use this as a way to, as hard as it is to go through, to sort of take the lessons.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. David, you've got operations, like I said, America, South America, Europe, Sweden, service operations all over the world. Some parts of the world, I know this from working with you and your company, certainly Latin America, for instance, the 24/7 component and taking safety home, taking critical error reduction techniques from SafeStart home. And Alex has got experience with this too. I mean, one of your places in Colombia made an MTV video that was actually a really good song. I can't believe they wasted this song on it, like you didn't try to, I mean, but then in other places, North America, Europe, the 24/7 thing, there's been a great deal of resistance to that, or they've been, less forthcoming, so this is, you don't give a choice now, right? I mean, this is a 24/7 thing. So how are you folks planning on dealing with this on a global basis? Because it's going to be easier some places than others. And I'll come back to you, Alex, and also Paul, if you've got a comment or two on this. And I then want to get back to Alistair and talk about how we're all managing the contractors, because he said that's where it came in from the outside, right? So we want to make sure we get to that too. But David, if you could, sort of from a global perspective, safety 24/7, and what are you planning on doing at Epicor about it?
Well, at Epiroc, we basically.
Sorry, Epiroc.
That's okay. That's fine. That's fine. We are in a journey with SafeStart, of course, and there have been pockets of, and cultures really drive how much they want to, quote unquote, bring this safety thinking home, because it's still in some areas seen as a work thing versus a home thing. But this has really thrown a dose of reality onto this, whereas I think it couldn't. It's a catalyst for that. And so people are making the connection, I think, a lot more about, hey, work and home, and they blend, and now I'm working from home. So it really creates an overlay now of the reality that the way we live and the way we are can now be impacted on both fronts, literally in our own four walls of our home. So in some ways, it's been a really interesting thing. It's one of those things, I think, out of bad sometimes can come good. And, and so it's like all the technology we've learned to use and all of the, one thing I noticed, there are companies cropping up out of nowhere to provide services and capabilities and things related to COVID. There are software suppliers with thermal cameras now that will screen your people coming in. And instead of going through alpha and beta phases, they're actually selling it. Now you're the alpha and beta phase. So, it's created so many dynamics. But people this is a very personal thing. And that's why I mentioned that originally, because that's where the 24/7 comes in. Now, when I say things like line of fire, they're going, God, there's an invisible line of fire. And we've talked about it before. We've talked about gravity is a line of fire, right? Wind pushing something can be a line of fire. Carbon monoxide, if you're in that, you can't see it either. So there are these principles, I think, are getting reinforced. And I think it's breaking down some of those barriers that people might have had, to where they see this as a more melded thing related to them as a person and their reality. And it really is acting as, in my mind, cementing that relationship between these principles and you as a person, you as a family, that before was potentially abstract. Well, it's not abstract anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, you're like you. I was saying to you and Alex before we got on the webinar with everybody. All of how to deal with invisible line of fire. It all was in SafeStart, but it wasn't all in one place. It wasn't all focused on one really important thing like COVID. And other than not standing in the water when you plug an electrical appliance in, invisible line of fire, or if you're not working on your car in the garage when it's running, it isn't that big a deal. Right now it is. So but Paul, being from the UK and all, a man's home is his castle. I believe that's where that expression originated. And I've known from working in the UK and speaking at the conferences there that certainly much more willingness, appetite, warmth towards the safety 24/7 than there ever has been previously in the UK and Europe. But what have you been hearing? Like, have people finally just decided, we got to bite the bullet, like we were going to do it before, but now, we're like, there's no other way than, we have to deal with this 24/7. So what's the general feeling out there about this? Because it's a fair cultural shift for a lot of UK European companies.
Is that for me?
Yeah, if you could, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, my word of wisdom and more train of thought than anything else on the topic would be, if you have a flexible health and safety risk management system based on core principles and values with ingrained resilience, the noise here is COVID is just another risk that you manage within that framework, be that it's of course a huge and significant one at the moment. But if you need a new standard for what you were doing before, it obviously wasn't good enough. I mean, that's something that's resonating a lot across the UK, but all the elements of the system need the ability also to evolve at pace. So I think the one thing that we've noticed from the current situation is pace and intensity of incidents are so aggressive, it's impossible to predict. We need to sit down on how, we need to predict and plan. And I think focusing and being able to flex simply at speed to support the response to an emerging risk, that is where lots of the processes and systems people won't have stood up to this challenge. And at times simplicity in a system allows this. I mean, that's kind of, from a lot of my customers, that's what I'm getting good feedback on at the moment.
Are they worried, Paul, at all about having to actually talk to their people about taking this on, working with, because it's obviously, one child to your child to you to a coworker, and we could be shut down. So are they worried about, is there a lot of trepidation about that as well? Because I would think there would be in Europe, but I don't want to be too presupposing.
Yeah, I think there's an alternate message. I mean, within different industries, dependent on, if you look at construction, people kind of need to be there. It's an industry in which people need to be out on the field, right? We need them out there. But a lot of customers are just building in. The world of work will be different. It's as simple as that. The ability to work remotely is of course going to see offices being left a little bit more redundant, I feel, or certainly used sparingly. People have found ways of working, collaborating, contract KPIs, for example, lengths of programs, communication channels, etc., will need to be reviewed. So many jobs as we know them will disappear, and I believe new ones will potentially will create new risks to manage, will emerge. But there's a lot of trepidation, there's a lot of fear, but we can only build in. And what I really liked from Alex's point of view and Alistair's, social distancing, hygiene, track and tracing. I think miscommunication is a huge challenge for business leaders at the moment. Okay,
all right. Well, thanks, Paul. Alistair, I mean, I don't know how specific you can be, or if whatever you could give people later on if they were really looking for specific advice. But I'm going to get everybody to talk just a bit about, managing contractors, permanent contractors, temporary contractors. You mentioned that, you think it came in from the outside. So just take it away from there, and hopefully our audience can take whatever they want away from what you're saying.
Okay, I think the first thing when it comes to contractors is I go back to that point I made earlier. We've managed to maintain quite a high level of production during the whole thing, which has been good. And that's required us to continue to have a certain amount of contractors within our business all the time. We got a lot of embedded contractors, as I'm sure others have as well within the business. And embedded contractors, it's pretty straightforward. We treat them as employees. It's the same protocols, the same rules, the same thing. And it just is about what we've been trying to do earlier was to build this, this partnership thing with our main contractors all the time, so that we were working together, not as an employer and contractor. And I believe that's helped us a lot when it comes to the embedded contractors. We're working in a partnership there, and we are treating those people as if they were direct employees. When it comes to temporary contractors, that's where the difficulty starts, and that's the thing about what are you bringing into your factory from outside, and that creates it's creating its own problems with us in some areas where guys on site are going, do we really need those people in our factory? We don't know where they've been, they don't live in our area, they don't come from this place, because we could be bringing contractors from different countries. I mean, the first thing we're doing is we're minimizing that as much as we possibly can. We're also stretching out our with the production way we're doing things. We're stretching things out at the moment so that we're stretching out our shutdowns so that we minimize the amount of people we need to bring into the factory and factories, so that we can maintain a stable workforce in that respect and not bring in too many new guys. And then when it gets down to the fact that we have to bring people in, again, it's on a needs basis. Is it business critical that these people come in? So we're not just doing it because, oh, look, we got a bit of space, let's get some guys in and do this work here or that there. It's not about that. This is about, is it needed? And if we don't need it at the moment, then we don't do it, because we could be creating more of a problem. And then you get down to the very, very end part, says, right, we've got to bring this guy in, and then it's about controlling those people and making sure in the early parts when they're there that they are following those straightforward social distancing rules. And we've got to build things in place to make sure that they do that as well. And I do think that there becomes a higher level of supervision required around about contractors to make sure, because we can't have them doing the things they might want to do. But again, I think the other part of it, Larry, is that, again, I think we're all getting very wise to the fact as well. So, we would like to think that people are actually, we don't have to tell them too much. They think we'd like to think people understand a bit now. We will go through the cycle, but we've got to get to that part. So our main part in contractors is, we will be checking them before they come in. We'll be doing all those things that you would expect us to do. We want to build the partnerships, but we're minimizing it as much as possible to minimize the risk, and that's at business critical level.
No, that makes sense, actually, to limit what you need to do. Do you think? I'll just ask you, Alex. Do you think it'll get to the point where, I mean, I can certainly remember working with oil companies, and I know you've worked for some energy companies before too, but where they would actually want to see the minutes of your safety meetings as a contract company to see whether it was just, gripe stuff or whether you actually had legitimate, and to get even a feel for the substance behind the culture wherever they could. So are you going to be trying to delve into what is the company doing internally for training around COVID so that you get a certain amount of assurance before they come into your facilities, Alex? Or are you just going to make sure from the time they get there that they just do everything you want them to do and that's enough?
No, I mean, I think we've had that specific discussion about what needs to be included in the validation part or the vetting part for any contractor, particularly the temporary ones. And I think, I'll build off what Alistair said, and I think Paul made a really important point, is that you shouldn't need to create new standards or new procedures in this case. We should just be incorporating the ones we have and stress testing to see if they are robust enough and clear enough given the current challenge in terms of COVID. So, okay. Sorry, I got a slow connection here. So I think one of the key things when we're talking about these standards is with COVID, it's not rewriting the standard about how we manage contractors, but it's really making sure that the expectations and the rules and the protocols are crystal clear. And that's actually a good practice for any of our standards on an ongoing basis, because even today, before COVID, if we looked at our contractor standards, we may think it's clear. We may think people understand them, but probably not 100%. So particularly with COVID, when somebody comes on site, you know, whether it's a permanent or a temporary contractor or our own employees, is it absolutely crystal clear what the expectations are? And I think that's a way to sort of incorporate inside the existing standards. Yeah, and so I think that's a really key part.
No, good point too. David, what about what about with you are the contractors that are going in so many locations in the field services all over, and you are the people having the contractors in at your manufacturing facilities. So from both perspectives, if you could.
Yeah, I'd say vetting is usually the key word, whether it's inbound or outbound. Where are employees going out into scenarios? We've limited pretty much all travel. It has to be approved at the highest levels. The locations where people might go for work content in the mines, we're still expecting our employees to follow all the protocols that we have and to ensure that they can basically exercise those wherever they're going, of course, right? Because it doesn't do any good for us to have an expectation and then they get there and they can't do that for some reason or another. A lot of this has been really reduced in terms of activity levels. And again, this need is really the driver where, you know, it's people are having to be approved to come on site, and there's some discussions and vetting, and all of them are subject to our screening and monitoring and those kind of things. But there certainly has been a marked reduction in those kind of interactions. We've sealed off entrances at most of locations that are open so that they have to go through single or dual source locations, whether they're walking into a facility or whether they're going through a gate with someone who medically is evaluating them, temperatures and questionnaires and things of that nature. And so basically it's just really shrinking the footprint down of the risk that is around that, because there's just too many variables, as everybody has said before.
Well, I mean, I love your line about the standards, you know, Groucho Marx, you know, I live by my principles, and if you don't like my principles, well, I'll change my principles. But there are, you know, just so many standards around the world, and you've got to balance them all. You know, I think what Alex and you both were saying is that, you know, you've got to give the people, and I know Mariana was saying it from Cargill last webinar, was that you've got to give the people the freedom to act locally quickly, but you've also got to be able to provide, you know, good corporate governance. And a big deal in the United States with the North American expert panel webinars was the focus that a lot of them, or the energy a lot of them had to do in terms of dispelling the misinformation or the bad information that was out there, because there was so much of it. Paul, I know I asked you about this earlier. I don't know whether you had time to talk to a ton of people about it. And it's one of the questions that we got in prior to this from the audience. But the equivalent of an ISO standard, ISO 7000, ISO, you know, like 14,000, have you heard talk on the street or around, you know, about there'll be some sort of standard for companies and contractors and stuff around this? just anything you've heard like that? I know some people have talked about the standards for, for good manufacturing processes with food and pharmaceuticals and adopting that. So anyhow, Paul, just what have you heard out there around this? Is there going to be
Yeah, I've just been squiggling some notes. If you do see me eyes down, it's only because I'm not a seasoned EHS professional like you guys. So, so I said to Larry, one webinar, I just wore a T-shirt that said "winging it."
yeah, well,
But
no.
I've got some notes. Yeah. Some of the feedback, I've got some great customers, Lloyd's Register, ITV in the UK, SCS Railways, work with some great companies. But when it comes to sort of the whole contractor manager, the ones that certainly the noise is around, the ones that have succeeded with supply chains are the ones that have worked closely together. So true safety is about partnership and not going to get away from procedures per se. I don't think that's, and I don't think we want to. I think there's time for procedures, but we need to get into the DNA of the contractor. How do we work harmoniously? I think ISO has a role to play, of course, but it's based on predict and plan. And we need to understand how resilience and adaptable an organization can be and is. I think that's the key. The message goes so far, but the pandemic say supplier contractors working more collaboratively will be a game changer, I think, in the future. A few other notes that I had, I spoke to a few of my customers. There's some talk around it. Inevitably, contractors will have to show COVID-19 controls are being applied to their teams, provide PPE, hugely scarce at the moment. As far as ISO, most likely first ask is on business continuity standard ISO 2200. But given we have so many inter-country variances on even the social distance of 2 meters in UK, 1 meter in Denmark, for example, international consensus is far off. So remember, we still have so little about COVID-19 as a disease. Transmission and Safety 7 health management has to evolve rapidly. We need more sharing and calibration to get us moving forward fast. So that's some feedback from me and certainly my teams.
Okay, all right. Well, well, thank you for that, Paul. And I think that Alistair, we don't have too much time left, but like somebody specifically is asking about managing the safety 24/7 aspect in Sweden, and if you're doing anything in particular or in addition special for there, or are you, or for Europe, or for Europe.
Well, the direct answer is no, we're not doing anything different for Sweden. So that's the answer to the question. I suppose that question that is why not? We're not. I mean,
well, that's good. We're close to running out of time. So no. Just carry on. Go ahead.
No. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sorry. No, we're not doing anything special in particular for Sweden. We haven't come up against a major issue with our firm. We got a few factories in Sweden. We haven't come up against a major issue. People we're finding in working for us are tending to follow the straightforward, simple protocols. It's working. It seems to be working in their life 24/7 as well. So we're not making any changes there, and it seems to be going okay so far for us, Larry. Don't see any.
Okay.
Larry, let me maybe be provocative a little bit, but I think we've taken the approach that there's a little bit of a paradox about managing safety 24/7 or managing safety at home, in the sense that I don't think you can. I think you can manage things when people are at work, and I think safety at home and safety 24/7 is going to be a reflection of what culture you've really developed. So I think the work has to be in developing the culture on a day-to-day basis. What I think you can do, and what we do is give very focused, selective content help in terms of telling people, here's the things you can try, here's the things that maybe can help, just to give some options. And then I think the best way to really develop safety 24/7 is by having the peers actually do it and take it and show it to each other. So it's a little bit of a paradox that I think management isn't going to be able to create safety at home. I think it's going to be a reflection of the culture.
Well, I mean, I agree, Alex, and I also I would also even extend that to you really can't control somebody's balance for them either. You know, if you've got kids, you know that once they're past arm's length, you can't keep their balance for them. Um, you know, it's interesting sometimes the paradigm is that, you know, if somebody slips or falls, it's what they slipped or tripped on that caused it. But as soon as you say, whose responsibility is it for you to keep your balance, most people admit it's their own. In this case, though, the challenge of 24/7 is bigger than ever before, because the difficulties are much more than physical hazards than that you can see for sure. David,
Yes.
what about you folks in I mean, I know some of the stuff we're working on with you because we're filming some of the stuff there, but if you could talk maybe just a bit about, you know, the deliberate practice as well too. In other words, you know, the getting out there and talking to people about, hey, you know, you're going to contact COVID in the next 24 hours. Where and when do you think it would likely be? And, you know, what human factors or states would cause it and so on?
One of the things that I think is interesting is and I'm curious if the other gentlemen have had this experience. So I've talked to a lot of people in our company in a lot of locations, and some people I've talked to very personally, one-on-one people I work with a lot. And I've never seen a topic where there's two layers of belief and understanding about it. There's the top surface layer, and a lot of that's driven by the impact at work and in their life at that level. But there's a below the surface one about what they really believe about this whole thing, because there's a lot of opinions out there, a lot of information, a lot of misinformation, and so the reason I relate to this is when we started to talk about this issue of anticipating error and what do you see would be a situation why you might catch it, everybody is frozen almost when you ask them that, because they realize this is such a massive thing, but yet they're trying to then put it in terms that relate to what is the possibility. How does someone catch it? Where was I? What, you know, those kind of things. And although we're thinking about this a lot, when that question comes to you, you realize, okay, how do I do that? Because we've been really big and we've gone 56 minutes now, 58 minutes, whatever. And the biggest thing about COVID is touching your face.
Mm-hmm. All the time.
Okay. And that, to me, it's been very dramatic to me that hasn't been one of the mantras. It's been social distancing. It's been, you know, things you touch and it's clean. But at the end of the day, you can't see it. But if it doesn't get into an orifice, because I said Microsoft should call this orifice 2020, because that's really what it is. If it gets into an orifice, you got a problem. And that's the teaching and the training that we've really tried to emphasize with people, because at the end of the day, that's the biggest risk component right there. So if people can learn, we've had the big discussion, oh, if I wear masks, I'm going to touch my face more. Well, that's true. So how do you balance that? But my point is there is a deeper level of this that really drives people. And when you ask them that question, it's very difficult for them to put into perspective where they think they personally might have that encounter. But when you start to discuss it with them, then all of a sudden the kimono comes off and they realize, hey, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of situations. And again, we've really emphasized don't touch your face. A big emphasis on that.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you. And you know, it just seems that whenever I have to public speak or get on a webinar, my nose starts to run, just the adrenaline. So a Kleenex with me, but I'm not sick, everybody. I just wanted you to know that. I think you know, some excellent points there, David, though, that really thought provoking and actually will be one of the two subjects of our next webinar. But like you said, the two levels, you know, on the surface, obviously everybody's got to wave the flag. And that's deeper down though, what do they really believe, and how much effort will they make? And when you start realizing, at least I did personally, just how difficult it is to incorporate all these new habits and systems into your personal lexicon, like the mask and the wipes and the what you touch and the, even, like I couldn't tap this thing, so I had to use the keypad because it was more money, and I didn't have wipes and they didn't have any left in the drugstore, and you have to go wipe everything down that you've touched, and what else did I touch? And you can see, I can see that, I'm obviously, part of the effort, the program, but I can see people that are not in health and safety and in denial a bit. Would they make all that effort, right? So, less concern over time combined with effort isn't a good combination. So the title actually for the next one was Sticky Behaviors. We were going to do it in 2 weeks and talk about, how could we make the positive things from COVID stick, especially some of the behaviors and some of the attitudes about safety 24/7, more than just the workplace, and keep some of those good things going. But depending on what you folks, the audience, give us in terms of feedback, we could also in 2 weeks be dealing with, dealing with denial, that deeper level that David was mentioning, that we may all actually have to get at. So we're going to try to make these webinars as timely as possible, everybody, obviously make them as useful for everybody as we can. So based on your feedback, when we give you the follow-up email, we'll let you know what the next topic is going to be. It'll be one of those two. And we're pretty much out of time, Paul, but if you could maybe any sort of wrap-up thoughts for all of us for this one, and just maybe maybe anything for the one in 2 weeks. Might be able to get another guest panelist to join us as well. But if you could take us home, Paul.
Yeah, okay. There's one thing that I just think's a great. I keep touching my face now. You've got me at it. I've got chronic ADD, so I'm shaking here, trying not to touch my face. I'll end with this. I'll take, because we HSC Global Series and SafeStart are partners, but we drive engagement to help people collaborate. We need, I think, as not just as a global community outside of EHS, but actually within EHS, there's never been such an opportunity for us all to really come together now and collaborate. One computer, 5 computers is better than one, right? And there's some unbelievably influential minds, fantastic minds out there that can help us navigate our way through this current crisis and future crises that are inevitable. So I think for me, let's not pretend that we know what the new normal is going to look like, because in an effective vaccine or a cure, we rapidly go back to the old ways, another spike or a different COVID strain, and who knows what will happen, right? So the best thing we can do now is use platforms like this, bring business leaders together, collaborate, educate, innovate, and navigate our way through as a team of EHS professionals. That's kind of my final thought.
Well, yeah, I agree, Paul. And I mean, and to your point, I mean, we had a plan, the four webinars, but we've already called a couple of audibles, just because things are changing, like you said, as quickly as they are, and we want to try to make everything as useful for everybody as we possibly can. So 2 weeks 2 weeks from now, everybody, it'll either be dealing with denial. Maybe I'll use your byline there, David. The second level or the deeper level.
It's not just a liver in Africa, right?
Yeah, exactly. And or if the audience is more interested, we can also talk about making the sticky behaviors kind of theme, or maybe we can catch a bit of both, plus the questions from the audience as well. Thank you very much for sending them in, and thank you all, hundreds and hundreds of you. Thank you very much for for tuning in and attending, and we look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks. And I'd also, again, thank you all of the panelists. Thank you very much for taking the time and helping us out here. And I'm sure everybody really enjoyed it. And David, thank you so much. 3 a.m. Really appreciate it.
All in.
Okay. All right, you guys. All the best. Talk to you in a couple of weeks. Okay. Thanks again, everybody.
Bye-bye. Cheers.